A very good evening. I'm very privileged to be joined by Professor M.D. Nalapat for a conversation on what exactly is happening in Taiwan. Professor Nalapat, thank you so much, sir. Finally, we've been able to have this conversation. It's so good to see you after a long time.
Thank you, Sharon. And incidentally, I'll be going to Taiwan. I'm leaving Delhi on the 12th, and I'm going to reach there on the 13th, provided we can get through any PLA blockade on the way.
So, what do your friends in Taiwan tell about Pelosi's visit and what exactly is happening? Because the tensions are extremely concerning for everybody around the world. Because perhaps the Ukraine war is something that could be tolerated to an extent because we know that the use of nuclear weapons won't certainly happen. But in this matter, you really can't trust China as a responsible actor when it comes to conflicts.
Look, China has got the Chinese Communist Party has got its legitimacy from the fact that a lot of Chinese have progressed up the economic ladder. The reality is Taiwan and linkages with Taiwan. I mean, Hong Kong was also there. Hong Kong, frankly, has been almost completely destroyed where this purpose is concerned. But Taiwan is a life support machine for the more advanced sectors of the Chinese economy. And if you rip the life support machine off, for example, if you launch a war, let's say we're talking about there's so many important knowledge industry, items of manufacture. All that depends on human brain power. And you'll have 40, 50, 100 flights leaving Taiwan with that brain power, and the Chinese will be able to control nothing, frankly, assuming they were able to succeed, which I don't think is a very likely prospect. So the fact of the matter is, Xi Jinping, I mean, frankly, Biden made a big mistake by making these initial, very, if I may say so, unwise remarks publicly. Oh, well, she shouldn't have gone. The Pentagon thinks it's a bad idea. Obviously, he thinks it's an awful idea. And he's claiming that the Pentagon thought it was a bad idea. I don't know if that's the case. I hope not. I hope, but the fact is that gave Xi Jinping the confidence that you bully a little more and then the visit will be called off. Point one. Point two, poor old Xi Jinping now is so caught up in this fascination of the China dream and everywhere, trying to make the whole world look like China, that he actually believes the whole world is China. Now, as far as China is concerned, China is Xi Jinping and Xi Jinping is China. We heard that about a previous Prime Minister of India, if you remember. So, I mean, but that could be true in China, where Xi Jinping is definitely very powerful in the governance structure, and the governance structure runs up almost anything there is worthwhile to run in China. But Biden is not America, and America is certainly not Biden. So the reality is that Biden may not like, Nancy Pelosi to go there, but the fact is the U.S. president doesn't have power over the House Speaker. Nancy Pelosi is number three in the warrant of precedence after the president and vice president. In India, number three, president, vice president, prime minister. I mean, Pelosi is, of course, not looking after the executive. In India, the prime minister actually is way more powerful than the president or vice president. But
Right.
here, you got number three. And from that point of view, the legislature is independent of the executive and the judiciary is independent of both. So Biden can't bully Pelosi into not going. And once she announced that she was going, once you had a bipartisan delegation that agreed to come, and I think Pelosi should make it, clear as to who are the members of the delegation who had agreed to come and then backed out after the Chinese started saber rattling, and then we'll know. A bunch of cowards in the House of Representatives, whoever they are. But the representatives
Yes.
who agreed to go with her, as well as Pelosi herself, they have shown they're not cowards. And there's no question that she could not have backed down. Because if she had backed down, they would have been humiliated before the American electorate,
Yeah.
and all of them would have lost their political careers. And more importantly, the confidence in America as a security partner would have
Right.
gone down to very sharp levels. So,
How
uh,
true is it that Pelosi is actually doing this because she's been accused of insider trading? And while Pelosi's visit is happening, Biden administration is actually considering reducing tariffs on China.
look, if Biden reduces tariffs on China, well, there are enough people, in America, the billionaires club, who would like that very much to happen, because for them, what's important is making money. It doesn't matter if you sell your mother or you sell your country or you sell anything else, but you must make money. And the more zeros there are to your bank account, the better, no matter how. But the reality of the situation is that if Biden makes any conciliatory move towards China, his popularity is going to fall even more than it's fallen now. And this kind of a step will definitely impact the Democratic Party in the midterm. So I'm not sure about if Biden is going to be incentivized enough by the billionaires club to do that. So, as far as Pelosi is concerned, look, all these reports came about. Pelosi has a lot of enemies, if you ask me, in her own party, Republican Party. And what did Pelosi's husband do? He sold shares at a loss. So, if you're saying that Nancy Pelosi is guilty of making her husband lose money on the shares that he's traded in, well, that's fine. But the reality is he's actually lost money because he sold the shares, which he knew were going to go up in value. Because immediately people said, this is what happened, and because of that, I'm sure the shares that this guy has got, Mr. Pelosi has got, would have been shot up in value. Well, guess what? The chap sold those shares before that, knowing that this would be precisely the kind of allegation. So, frankly, Sharon, I don't take this kind of allegation seriously. Whether in Indian politics or in American politics, 20 charges are hurled against a politician every day of the week.
Fair enough. And what does this mean for Taiwan? Because now we are discussing from largely an American perspective of what things might be in the American polity. But for Taiwan, this definitely is something, and we could see that in the way in which Pelosi was actually received in Taipei. That is one thing. And the second thing is how and what are the chances that China will react aggressively? Because already Xi Jinping is making a lot of statements. So just to declutter that, I think we could use your perspective.
Look, as I already told you, if the United States gets into a kinetic conflict with Taiwan, that is, in the sense of the Chinese going into Taiwan, and the United States will certainly intervene after that. Well, the reality is the Chinese economy will implode. If the Chinese economy implodes, we are talking of around 300 million people who are going to lose their jobs. They are going to be hopping mad at Xi Jinping, quite frankly, because Xi Jinping has claimed ownership of everything that's happening in China, and of course, a lot of things that are happening outside. So that would be complete suicide for Xi Jinping, and it would shake the foundations on which the Communist Party of China is based. So, personally, I mean, I don't believe, frankly, that there is a risk of a serious risk of a kinetic conflict. Unless, I mean, for example, if the Chinese side had been crazy enough to have their own fighters shadow Pelosi's aircraft, incidentally, there were Taiwanese fighters guarding her, and if some crazy Chinese pilot said, "Oh my God, I'm going to, become a hero," and he's going to destroy his country and launch a third world war by shooting down Pelosi's aircraft. Look, the Chinese are not mad. The PLA generals, I met quite a few of them. They're not mad. And Xi Jinping may bluster and bully, but he is a very rational guy. And I can assure you, I don't believe they're going to be foolish enough to try anything kinetic in the matter
Right.
of Taiwan.
So what I want to ask you is, how much is Taiwan a part of the Chinese public imagination? Because when it comes to China, we've seen what they can do with cartography. They just manipulate maps and make them up all day, and then they claim a territory which is not a part of theirs as theirs. For instance, if I have to give an analogy, when it comes to Kashmir, there is an emotion involved because there is a civilizational sentiment. But when it comes to Taiwan, is it the same with the common Chinese people, sir?
Well, I'd like to say that the original Chinese culture is alive and well in Taiwan, where it is really not in mainland China. In the PRC, because of the fact that the Communist Party has been ruling that country from 1949 and frankly ruling large parts of it from the 1930s. The fact is that the original Chinese culture has been severely impacted. In Taiwan, uh, there is a very strong underlay of Sinic culture. The tea ceremony, for example, you'll have a perfect tea ceremony in Taiwan when you can't get it in China. You'll have opera, including singing and the opera players in Taiwan, whereas in China, especially after Jiang Zemin came on the scene and he started fusing disco with opera, with Chinese opera, and created some weird fusion. Opera hasn't recovered from that in the PRC. So if you look at Chinese culture, it's much stronger in Taiwan than in China. But if you look at communism, I have always said that Taiwan will be a poison pill. If God forbid it is swallowed up by the PRC, the Communist Party is going to be the worst sufferer because the Taiwanese people are today completely steeped in the democratic tradition. You may have somebody who's 80, 90 or something like that, who's still nostalgic for the period when Chiang Kai-shek was the absolute dictator and you had that evil dictator Mao and they were fighting each other. But you get me anybody below, I mean 50 definitely. If there are people below 60, for example, who believe that way, there must be a very small number of them. So the reality is that the culture in Taiwan, the political culture in Taiwan, is now completely different from that of China. The political culture in Hong Kong was a bit different from that of the mainland, but today there's a really like a steamroller. They're trying to unify that particular culture. So the unique Hong Kong characteristics are wiped out. The Taiwanese have
Right.
no desire to follow in that, quite frankly. So I'd like to say that I really don't believe that the Chinese people are willing to risk their security, their livelihood, the stability of their country for the sake of grabbing Taiwan by force. I don't believe it.
Right.
I mean, I don't believe that that's the situation. But the Communist Party of China has raised this to a kind of a fever pitch. So if you're in China and you say that, oh, I don't care about Taiwan, you're likely to be visited by the police in a matter of hours. So that's the point. Each time you even mention the word Thai, immediately there's your Chinese friends will start talking about how important Taiwan is and how we can't go to sleep at night until because Taiwan is not yet back in the motherland and all that.
Yeah.
Frankly, when they go back to their bedrooms and talk to their wives, I hope not there. They'll say, "My God, we are
It's
sick and
very
tired of this Taiwan
it's
issue.
rather
Sick and tired
superficial
of the Taiwan issue.
nationalism there is. Right.
It's fake. Frankly, it's completely fake. The Chinese nationalism is in their stomachs, is in the clothes they wear, is in the income they have in their wallets, in their
Yeah.
houses. It's a very healthy nationalism. It's
So,
not the communist
speaking
parties
of
is not healthy, but the public there, it's a healthy nationalism. The Communist Party has a very unhealthy nationalism, and Xi Jinping has put that on steroids.
right, When it comes to livelihood, since you were speaking about that, China has also tried to economically boycott Taiwan, thinking that it will weaken the economic structure of Taiwan. Even when it comes to certain diplomatic fronts like pineapple diplomacy, they're trying to snatch the livelihood of Taiwanese farmers. Now, the Taiwanese are forced to look up to Southeast Asia, even including India and even East Asia for that matter. So, how do you see this trajectory going where the Chinese are starting to boycott a lot of these economic agreements and arrangements that they traditionally had with the Taiwanese?
Look, they're zeroing in on specific groups of voters, farmers, and voters like that, specific groups of voters, and they're trying to say that if you're not friendly, if you don't kowtow to the Chinese line, well, you lose your exports. But guess what? That happened actually way back about 6 years ago when Tsai, when actually more than 6 years ago, when she came to power, and in about 3 years' time, they had diversified their markets, as you correctly said, mostly into Southeast Asia and in to other parts of the world, including North America, including Europe. Frankly, there's a cachet in buying Taiwanese, fruit and produce that's boycotted by the communist regime. In fact, the Taiwanese should have a label. This product has been boycotted by the CCP, and I think their sales would double. So, frankly, it's not a very big threat. It's a And secondly, they have a serious economic. I know there were some hot-headed people there who said we are going to freeze all Taiwanese enterprises. Well, you got $1 trillion worth of Taiwanese enterprise there. Already, I think this kind of threat would be working to make several $100 million worth of investment, and investors start looking for other areas besides Taiwan, Indonesia, Vietnam, India, because they realize one day or the other they may be expropriated in the PRC. So essentially, the Xi Jinping is harming the Chinese economy short and long term by this kind of impulsive action.
And do you believe that America today holds that legitimacy as a security provider to a lot of its allies? Uh, Example one, pulling out of Afghanistan, then it was the Ukraine war, and right now, what is happening in Taiwan is not really, beaming a lot of confidence in the common people over there.
Look, Sharon, I'd be quite frank with you. As far as Afghanistan is concerned, I wish the United States had maintained enough of logistical support to enable the Afghan National Army to continue its fight. They pulled out in a shameful way, the way Gorbachev pulled out from Najibullah, supporting Najibullah in a shameful way. And the same thing happened to Ashraf Ghani, and it's a shameful kind of thing that Joe Biden did, and he's justifying it by saying Donald Trump agreed to it. Well, you came as the reverse of Trump, and now you're embracing Trump and saying, "Oh, I'm doing it because Donald Trump, said this is what should be done." The fact of the matter is that at least now, after the capture of the killing of Ayman al-Zawahiri in a house belonging to Sirajuddin Haqqani, the deputy leader of the Taliban, no less. Now, possibly somebody in the CIA may believe that poor Mr. Haqqani did not know who his tenant was, that he had so many houses across the whole world, that he didn't know in this particular house some underling of an underling has given it to, my God, Ayman al-Zawahiri. Maybe the poor Taliban chaps don't have enough policemen. They are busy rounding up people, killing people, all kinds of things like that. So they didn't have enough policemen to check up on Zawahiri. Look, just as Osama bin Laden's, death in Abbottabad showed the falsity of the Pakistan army as an ally in the war on terror, this has shown the falsity of the Biden assertion that Afghanistan has given up terror. Now, I think the Americans will be more sympathetic to those Afghans, and that is the overwhelming majority of the population, that are looking at removing the Taliban from power through popular movements. I think these popular movements are going to increase. They're
Correct.
increasing in Pakistan, they'll increase in Afghanistan. And I'd like to say, I strongly believe that the Pashtun people, the proud Pashtun people, they should have a separate country comprising of land from Afghanistan and land in Pakistan. They should have a separate Pashtun country. And I'm very sure that this Pashtun country will be a moderate, prosperous country. The Baloch people in Pakistan, I'm not talking about Baloch in Iran. No, that's a different kind of situation. But in Pakistan, they deserve their own, space in the sun. So, as far as the United States is concerned, from the very pained remarks made by poor old Blinken, who must have fallen for this, that the Taliban is now suddenly converted and become a saintly force. Well, I mean, poor old Blinken now realizes that there's no saintliness in the Taliban. So hopefully they'll understand that they have to help not the Taliban but the Afghan people. And you can't help the Afghan people by shoveling money to the Taliban. You got to help them through channels that can ensure that that it reaches the real people of Afghanistan, and it helps them to ensure a government different from the government they had.
How Blinken was, frankly, was sarcastic about how he was surprised about this. But I did have a question when it comes to Bin Laden's killing. The Pakistanis were actually caught red-handed, and it was a surprise for the rest of the world because nobody expected it. Maybe in India there was a sense that he could have hid in Pakistan because we know them up close and we know what they're capable of. But when it comes to Al Zawahiri, it's the other way around because many people are speculating that it's either the Pakistanis or even the Taliban who's helped the CIA in getting him. Otherwise, there was no possible way for the Americans to actually pursue him.
Look, I'm very sure there are elements in the Pakistan military who are alarmed by the way, first of all, it has become so Wahhabi, and secondly, by the way it has become so much a prisoner of China. I'm sure about that. As far as the Taliban is concerned, their Sirajuddin Haqqani is essentially a satellite of Pakistan, and they must be proud Afghans, Pashtuns in the Taliban. That's what I call the free Taliban, who would be upset about that and who would certainly be wanting to expose Sirajuddin Haqqani. It's normal for Pakistan to claim credit for everything. I'm surprised they haven't claimed credit for the Eiffel Tower yet, but it happened before they were set up. So that's probably the reason. But the reality is, frankly, I'm sure the CIA has its own contacts now inside the Taliban. I'm sure they, and possibly other countries have helped them, link with those contacts. That kind of thing is going on. The reality is, he was hiding in plain sight in the home of the deputy leader of the government. If that does not tell you a story of collusion, Sharan, I don't know what you will define as collusion.
Do you think, I mean, we are digressing from Taiwan, but since we are here, the next successor to Zawahiri, he's feared to be somebody more deadlier, somebody more dangerous, and is supposed to be feared, especially in the subcontinent of India. So, how do you see the trajectory of Al Qaeda going from here, and the internal dynamics of Afghanistan changing, especially because the Taliban wants to earn that legitimacy internationally?
Look, I want to say that whether it is Al Qaeda, whether it is the Taliban, which provides a welcoming home to them, any location where you have extremist variants of Islam, you have got economic turmoil, you've got societal, breakages, you have chaos, you have a miserable lifestyle. Muslims are the same as Christians and Hindus and Sikhs and Buddhists in wanting a good life, and they know very well extremism does not give you a good life. Extremists sold this idea. Unfortunately, a few people still believe that. It's that look, extremism gives you a terrible life in this particular life, but in the afterlife. The reality is that today is very different from the past. When in the past, a lot of people would be taken in by this belief that the afterlife will be, will be a ticket to paradise if you do the horrible things that these extremists wanted you to do. The reality is that that kind of a guarantee is completely antithetical to the teachings of Islam, which essentially is that the Almighty decides who will go to paradise and who will go to hell. And that decision is taken in the afterlife. It can't be taken by some Maulvi or Mullah or anybody else. So, quite frankly, that kind of, that kind of hypnotic belief that the human beings have got the key to the afterlife in some way is over. So, I don't frankly believe that the extremist philosophy will take a widespread root, and as a consequence of that, my own belief is that in a society where everybody is treated fairly, uh, those segments of society where this kind of extremist element will try and hide out will identify them and expose them. And we're already seeing that happen, for example, in many parts of the world. And as a consequence, the number of actual terror acts is much lower than what they could be. So I'm quite optimistic about the future. I don't believe, quite frankly, that this is an enemy that will pose any existential danger to us or even any severe danger to us, except in specific locations, in specific incidents.
But the last time when Bin Laden was killed, Al Qaeda actually vowed for revenge, and within 40 days they planned a lot of terror attacks around the world. And this time it is alleged that perhaps the actions are going to be even more swifter. So, do you have a reason to believe that something like this would happen, and it would perhaps upset security situations around the world?
Sharon, we got very good systems of monitoring in the world now, and a lot of that technology is expensive. A lot of that technology involves a huge amount of brain power, and I don't believe extremist organizations can match that. In the old days, I mean, it was easier, and these days I think it is more difficult. So, yes, there may be isolated attacks here and there, but then the networks are going to be uprooted very clearly and very openly so that others are warned from similarly activating, let's say, dormant networks. So, overall, I remain positive that we can escape. I mean, I think that it's a good thing for the world that that this thing happened, and I do hope it's that more such events take place, so that this kind of activity is shown up for what it is. It's not only dangerous to society; it's dangerous to the perpetrators.
So thank you so much for joining us. But what a time to be alive, especially for the younger generation, because I'm sure many of our elders have witnessed wars and they've experienced conflicts around the world, or they've been alive during that phase. But for us, we saw a pandemic. Now we are seeing the Ukraine war, then the US pulling out of Afghanistan, and all of this happened while, at least personally, me, I was pursuing my masters in geopolitics under your guidance. So it was like a practical example sitting in the class. But hopefully things will stabilize and conflicts won't take place around the world.
Sharon, things are never going to stabilize, but so long as they're in an upward trajectory, that's what we need to aim for. And I do believe our country is embarked on an upward trajectory. Thank you.
Thank you so much, sir. Very good evening to you, and thank you so much for joining us today.